Okay, so thanks everybody for joining us tonight for our International League of People Struggle release of our primer, which is Understanding ICE, Rising Fascism in the US and the People's Struggle Against It. We're just 3 days away from International Migrants Day itself, which is on December 18th. And I know many of you are preparing for actions and activities locally as part of the culmination of ILPS's and Defend Migrants Alliance's Week of Action. So shout out to all of you out there who are actively taking on the work to organize and defend our migrant communities. My name's B with ILPS, and I'll be your MC tonight. We're very excited to drop this primer because we know that as folks on the ground in our communities, it's always super useful to have more tools in your belt to take along as you talk to others in your communities to help make sense of what often seems like senseless and confusing and altogether downright cruel tactics of the current Trump regime. We have the primer available for download on our website at ILPS US, and the recording of this webinar will also be posted on our YouTube channel. So if you weren't able to catch everything or you want to host a watch party, you can always help distribute it afterwards to your networks, which we highly encourage you do. And then we also want to give shout outs to those of you who are at watch parties currently. I know that we have some regions representing. You can shout those out in the chat as well. But just wanted to take you through a quick outline of the primer, and then we'll be doing a read through with highlights and summaries of key things to take note of. So if I can have the next slide, please. So it's 4 sections. We'll be going through about ICE and then going on to the growth of ICE and the deportation machine, and then the impacts of ICE on our lives. And then we'll be wrapping up with defend our communities, defend people's struggle, the struggle against ICE and rising fascism. So how this is going to work, we're going to have our wonderful ILPS regional coordinators who are with us. From Baltimore, DC, Maryland, Virginia area, we have Jay. And from Seattle, Tacoma area, we have Toby. And they're going to take us through the reading of the primer. And we'll also be joined by our resource speaker, Lev, with Gabriella Seattle, and Bayan Washington, who will give us concrete examples of the organizing that's happening on the ground. So I'm going to pass it all over to Toby to take it away, and you can go to the next slide, please.
Thank you. I will get us started with the beginning of the primer. As a major arm of the U.S. government, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, regulates the international migration of workers to ensure the flow of cheap labor for super exploitation by the capitalist class. It intimidates and represses migrant communities and treats migrants as scapegoats during economic and political crisis, when in reality, it is U.S. imperialism that is at the root of such crisis that forces migrants to work abroad in the first place. With anti-migrant rhetoric and whipping up fear around migrant criminals, U.S. President Trump advances his fascist agenda by expanding ICE operations, including mass arrests, detentions, and deportations. These operations are coupled with the militarization of major U.S. cities, including the deployment of the National Guard in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. This primer details how ICE is a tool of U.S. imperialism, the impacts of ICE on the people, and what the people's struggle against ICE and for migrant justice can look like. Next slide. 1. About U.S. migration and customs enforcement, ICE. Next slide. Under the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, ICE is responsible for enforcing laws related to borders, immigration, trade, and customs. The 2 main ICE departments are Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, and Enforcement and Removal Operations, ERO. ERO carries out arrests, detentions, and deportations of migrants. HSI investigates transnational migration and trade activity, focusing on fighting global threats, and operates in over 50 U.S. embassies and consulates around the world, including in Israel, the Philippines, Haiti, Kenya, and El Salvador. It partners closely with foreign law enforcement agencies, shares intelligence data, and even conducts joint training. As a result, ICE serves as a repressive arm of the U.S. imperialist state and ensures major U.S. companies profit from migrant labor. It does this by promoting divisions among various nationalities in the U.S., particularly those from the working class. ICE serves as a tool to maintain the power of the ruling class. It aims to silence migrants with threats of detainment and deportation. It makes migrant workers fearful of organizing in their workplaces against exploitation and against the widespread violations of their rights. It thus aims to maintain a workforce that is highly exploitable for big corporations to profit off of by subjecting them to discrimination, repression, and denial of rights. And I will pass it over to Jay, our other regional coordinator, to continue sharing about the growth of ICE and the deportation machine.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide. So, the growth of ICE and the deportation machine. The historical development of the state's regulation of immigration shows how ICE is a tool of U.S. imperialism. Before September 11th, 2001. In 1933, the U.S. government established the Immigration and Naturalization Services, INS, under the Department of Labor, later transferred to the Department of Justice. The primary function was the administration of various immigration and naturalization matters, as well as activities related to investigation, enforcement, and deportation. From 1933 to 2001, the INS deported an average of 17,695 people annually. It built up its repressive capacity in the context of the economic and political crises of the time. This can also be seen in the rise of mass incarceration through the 1980s and 1990s. This laid the groundwork for the later expansion of the deportation machine in 2001, all of which exacerbated and reinforced systems of forced migration. It did so in an attempt to maintain its status as the number one global superpower at the expense of all working and oppressed people of the world. The 2001 to 2009 Bush period. Following the events of September 11th, 2001, the U.S. waged an intense ideological campaign on the U.S. people. The U.S. President Bush reoriented the issue of cross-border migration to become an issue of terrorism in the context of the War on Terror and to treat migrants as a threat to homeland security. A major component of the quote, War on Terror involved the enactment of the Homeland Security Act of 2002 that dismantled INS and created the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, or DHS. The DHS includes Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE, Customs and Border Protection, CBP, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. As a result, from 2002 to 2019, the U.S. deported on average 396 to 396,923 people yearly from DHS statistics. Throughout this period, the U.S. also waged wars of aggression, signed so-called free trade deals, and worsened climate change, all of which exacerbated and reinforced systems of forced migration. It did so in an attempt to maintain its status as the number one global superpower at the expense of all the working and oppressed people of the world. The 2009 to 2017 Obama period. U.S. President Obama deported over 3 million people, a record earning him the name Deporter in Chief. He adopted the Countering Violent Extremism CVE framework, in which any idea deemed a quote threat to the ruling system is labeled as quote extremism. This built on the War on Terror framework that further legitimized more state violence and surveillance against the people, including through ICE. The 2017 to 2021 Trump period. U.S. President Trump expanded the use of inhumane immigration detention and authorized large-scale workplace raids. Widespread propaganda labeling migrants as criminals and invaders was used to gain support for expanding the wall at the U.S.-Mexico border, costing roughly $15 billion. Millions of people rose up against his brutal separation of families and near elimination of refugee resettlement. The 2021 to 2025 Biden period. U.S. President Biden continued beefing up security at the borders by hiring 1,500 more security agents and officers, installing more drug detection machines, and using emergency powers to temporarily shut down the border when numbers are deemed overwhelming. In 2023, migrant deaths doubled at the border compared to previous periods. The President Trump period since 2025. A cornerstone promise of Trump's second presidency is to unleash the largest deportation program in U.S. history as a key part of his fascist offensive. In response to the economic and political crisis of U.S. imperialism, he sought to strengthen the capacity to repress the working class, divide the people, and create a bigger pool of easily exploitable workers. In 2025, Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill, which included a $170 billion boost in border militarization, adding 10,000 more ICE agents. Since ICE was created in 2003, its budget and the number of employees in ERO have both tripled. Trump's administration dismantled three DHS watchdog offices overseeing human rights abuse issues. Trump is going further to attack legal migration, threatening a permanent pause on migration from third world countries and even attempting to end birthright citizenship in his upholding of far-right racist remigration theories. And I'll pass it to Toby to take us through the next section on the impacts of ICE on our lives.
The impacts of ICE on our lives, the intensifying state terror of the growing ICE machine. ICE has carried out raids in neighborhoods and workplaces, arresting hundreds of people in the largest of operations. Other tactics include targeted kidnappings at immigration courts, which allow for rapid detention and deportation, while deterring migrants from participating in the legal process. ICE attacks have been used as a tool to terrorize entire communities, negatively impacting the everyday life in working class communities. In the wake of these activities, more and more migrants have been forced to limit their movement outside of their residences for fear of being detained, making the necessity of everyday life into difficult decisions, whether or not to pick up kids from school, go grocery shopping, or visit the hospital. As of the release of this primer, over 60,000 migrants are detained in over 400 ICE detention facilities across the US. While supposedly a temporary measure, many are detained for months or even years. They endure terrible conditions, including overcrowding, always on fluorescent lighting, inedible food, family separation, solitary confinement, and other cruel forms of punishment. Deaths resulting from medical neglect and suicide are not uncommon. As those detained are often the primary breadwinners, entire families are also pushed into further economic hardship and debt. Deported migrants experience physical and psychological abuse throughout the deportation process and at their final destination. The administration has promoted the use of expedited removal to hasten deportations, removing migrants' already limited access to judicial processes in defiance of international humanitarian legal standards. The deportation process has become a system of mass forced disappearances facilitated by U.S. government agents. ICE agents are often masked, carrying no proper identification, and use unmarked vehicles. The detained/deported person's fate and whereabouts are concealed, and their legal protections are restricted. One such example is Jose Medina Andrade, a Venezuelan migrant who was among the first during Trump's second administration to be sent to the Guantanamo Bay military prison, where he was tortured before being deported to South America. Another example is Tu Fan, who migrated to the US as a child refugee from Vietnam. Phan was held in a shipping container for weeks in a US military base in Djibouti before being deported to South Sudan. His case is one of many deportations to so-called third countries that the person has no relations to. Thus, they are on their own and have no support networks to assist them in the third country. In addition, the attacks on international students who took action in solidarity with Palestine set the basis for the application of immigration machinery of the state as a weapon against any opponents of US imperialist interests. As migrants wage more steadfast struggles and align with the movement seeking to liberate their homelands, the imperialist control seeking to liberate their homelands from imperialist control, they are tagged by the US state as terrorists or terrorism supporters. The Trump administration is also further integrating ICE into other bodies, i.e., police, IRS, health systems, to meet its staggeringly high quota of arrests and deportations as part of a comprehensive strategy to militarize the border and the interior of the US. The One Big Beautiful Act passed in Congress provides $30 billion over the next 40 years for ICE's enforcement activities, including the hiring of 10,000 new ICE agents, modernizing its fleet, and supporting removal operations. This budget is larger than most nations' militaries. Over 600 law enforcement agencies are now signed onto 287 programs with the Department of Homeland Security. This enables DHS to deputize local police officers to process immigration cases of people currently in jails, and even allows police to conduct immigration enforcement while in the community, essentially multiplying ICE officers without any additional hiring needed. National Guard deployments in cities like LA have directly assisted ICE agents in operations and more tightly integrated the different facets of state terror. While the US has always relied on migrant and enslaved labor to secure profits, in the past few decades, the collaboration between US imperialists and the ruling classes in countries around the world has systematized the neoliberal export of workers as human commodities. Workers forced to migrate are then super exploited in countries like the US. Here we see migrant farm workers in California and migrant meat processing workers in the UK. Once in the US, ICE and other tools of the state are used to divide the working class along lines of race and nationality to prevent the building of class consciousness and class struggle against their exploiters. The very rich drive a campaign of terror and demonization, falsely blaming migrants for the worsening conditions under capitalism and isolating them from US-born workers. This is done to deceive the people from realizing the ruling class is responsible, while also expanding and strengthening the state machinery and its ability to violently repress the workers. We see Trump holding a press conference at the US-Mexico border, claiming migrants are responsible for the high prices and lack of stable jobs. The rise of the deportation industry spells more suffering and exploitation of working migrants. Two of the largest corporations profiting off of anti-migrant policies are Geo Group and CoreCivic. Both backed Trump's re-election campaign and have been rewarded with multi-million-dollar profits from major government contracts that expand detention and deportation operations. These companies are contracted to provide everything from deportation centers and services to electronic monitoring to transportation for transfer and deportation operations. Not only are these companies paid directly by the government for detaining people, 165 per person per day, but they also maximize profits by taking advantage of a captive workforce to cut operations costs. Around 135,000 detained migrants are put to work in ICE's voluntary $1 per day program to staff the detention centers, performing essential tasks like cleaning, food preparation, and paperwork that allow detention centers to operate. This enables CoreCivic and Google and Geo Group to provide $200 million more per year as it cuts the costs of paying minimum wage and benefits to employee workers. Migrants in facilities across the country have taken action and exposed routine threats of solitary confinement from core civic and geo group guards for not participating in the ICE work program. Basic necessities such as toiletries and even spoons are not provided. Instead, they are sold at an absurdly high price in the commissary, with spoons costing $3 each. Phone calls sometimes cost $20 for 20 minutes. Migrants and their families are forced to shoulder the financial burden while already dealing with hefty legal fees and missing wages of those detained. Core Civic and Geo Group have collaborated with U.S. government officials to expand funding for ICE and ensure these work programs remain. This melding of corporate and state interests is most clearly seen by former Geo Group lobbyist Pam Bondi being installed as U.S. Attorney General, where she now spearheads the offensives against migrants. I will now pass over to Lev from Gabriela Seattle and Byron Washington to speak specifically about the fight for Kuya G, a detained Filipino migrant in the Northwest Detention Center, as well as some of the workplace struggles against organizing workers in the South Center Mall in Tukwila, south of Seattle.
Yes, thanks, Toby. Do you want me to talk about both together? Is that helpful? I can also talk about the workplace organizing in that portion.
Yeah, we have a separate section for the workplace organizing towards the end.
Perfect. Okay. And then can folks hear me okay? Sorry, I'm in my car. We're actually speaking of on the workplace. There's some active floods happening in the South Seattle, Tukwila area. And so there are a lot of folks responding in real time to additional health and safety hazards impacting workers. And a significant one, right, is the state terror being enacted on our Filipino migrants. So hi again, everyone. My name's Lev. And I've been organizing alongside some of the different other organizations really leading this fight for Kuya G, such as Migrante South Center, Malaya, Tacoma, Puso, as well as many other organizations that are part of the Tanggol Migrante movement and the Defend Migrants Alliance here in the Washington State area. Kuya G is a Filipino permanent resident visa holder who has been detained since March or late February, in the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. And over the long duration of his detention in a facility that is contracted, that is led by the contractor of Geo Group, which also has horrific health violations, from inedible food to lack of genuine medical support, and of course, just the overall isolating and very repressive conditions of being detained and separated from your community, not knowing when you'll be detained. All of these factors played a role in the worsening of Kuya G's health while inside. By July, he was complaining of stomach pains, blood in his stool, and the yellowing of his skin. And what we've come to learn as his medical conditions worsened with time is that the response of the ICE medical facility staff was to just provide him with laxatives, which actually worsened his conditions. And all the while, we cannot forget that in addition to really organizing and fighting the fascist terror that comes from not just Trump, but the overall U.S. administration's deployment of ICE in our neighborhoods, in our communities, we're also dealing with the fascism that comes from the very rampant state neglect and plunder of the Philippine government, who, while on paper says that they have over 9 billion pesos assigned to providing global resources such as the Assistance to Nationals program for the many Filipino nationals that are overseas. They were also playing a very direct role in the facilitation of Kuya G's experience, withholding information on how to utilize the assistance to nationals, resources, providing really lackluster legal support, and paying for basically their own preferential lawyer who received over $7,000 but didn't actually prepare Kuya for his immigration trial, and became aware of the health violations through the pressure of the mass movement of the community, but failed to provide any form of intervention. And this is what we're seeing time and time again with the conditions of many Filipinos who are in detention across the U.S., that whether it's demands to the ambassador to the U.S., Romualdez, and diplomatically intervening, or in providing meager resources in the form of financial aid, or navigating the system to be able to return home safely. Across the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Philippine government is failing to do so. So that is to say that as Kuya G's health worsened to the point of him requiring hospitalization, the consulate and ICE still work together to facilitate his deportation order, and we're trying to force him onto a plane Sunday, December 6th, December 7th, excuse me. The days are a little bit of a blur. But what we were able to do, and this is really showing the power and the importance of the mass movement, right? Because it wasn't just the folks who are going to the detention center every day or mobilizing to the streets, but it really involved the collective effort with labor leaders, with leaders of faith, with community members in the medical field. And then, of course, every person who signed a petition, made a phone call, and showed up to the airport to make sure that the airline was aware that Kuya G was not medically fit to go on a plane and be sent to his death, essentially. Because even if he survived the 15-plus-hour flight, the infrastructure in the Philippines to support him is also failing, right? We That's a whole other conversation, but it really points at for a country that emphasizes and really quote calls our overseas Filipino migrants, especially overseas Filipino workers, the new heroes. They're so quick to sell them out in order to ensure that they get the best deals in appeasing their puppet masters in the U.S. government, because they were very quick to update his travel documents, but they would not raise a single finger when he was begging on the floor to be hospitalized. And that says a lot about the role of the Philippine and U.S. government in medical violence for not just Kuya G, but even like Tita R in the Midwest and so many others. So we cannot discredit that every person that we can bring into the movement is so valuable in pulling together creative resources, different forms of action. So anyway, that's a uh, really fast version of the general story of what happened. I think just to share, though, that as part of the next steps in his campaign, we were able to get a temporary restraining order to prevent ICE from processing his deportation, excuse me, for up to 2 more weeks. However, that does mean that he is back at the detention center. And so we need to do anything possible, really continuing the power of the mass movement to ensure that he does have a safe recovery, so that at the end of the day, no matter what he wants to do, if he wants to stay here, if he wants to go back to the Philippines, he can. He is healthy, and that means that we need to continuously expose the horrific crimes being committed against the people inside the detention center, and also in these backdoor conversations between the Philippine government and the U.S. So, thank you.
Thank you, Lev, for sharing. Very agitational fight and something that I believe a lot of our organizations have taken up the struggle to free Koyuji as well. So for this next part, we'll be getting into what are our the actions that we need to take, right? How do we defend our communities, defend people's struggle? What does the struggle look like against ICE and rising fascism? Next slide. So, amidst incredible injustice, we have also witnessed historic resistance to ICE and state violence in general. In June 2025, thousands took the streets in Los Angeles to defend their communities, inspiring protests across the country. Communities are developing ways to protect their neighbors, equipping each other with trainings on people's rights and systems to monitor and respond to ICE activity. Furthermore, migrants, workers, and community members across all sectors have taken up sustained campaigns to defend their communities against all attacks and have even successfully freed migrants from detention. The propaganda movement against ICE continues to spread, isolating the fascist state machinery and promoting people's resistance. More and more, the working people in the US understand that fascism is a desperate means imperialism employs to save itself from its self-made crisis. Private ownership for super profits only benefits the few ruling elite, while the rest of the world suffers and is beat down with more repression. This only fans the flames of the people's resistance to end the imperialist system. In response to rising fascism, the International League of People's Struggle U.S. Country Chapter, ILPS US, and our members relaunched our campaign, Defend Our Communities, Defend People's Struggle, or DPS. This campaign works to unite our members, communities, and pro-people organizations in waging fights on the ground that combat increasing militarization at the hands of the U.S. and its agencies, especially ICE. ILPS and our members are working with other organizations to wage powerful fights to further expand the united mass movement fighting for the rights and livelihood of migrant workers, assert the freedom of our homelands from foreign domination, and to oppose the rising fascist attacks. Throughout 2025, our organizations, alongside the people, have taken up different forms of action, including community response efforts. In major regions and cities across the country, such as Baltimore, D.C., Chicago, New York, New Jersey, Northern California, Portland, Seattle, Southern California, our members, alongside other organizations, have coordinated efforts to train the community in knowing their rights, understanding the movements of ICE, and knowing how to monitor and respond to ICE presence and the detainment of community members. In several cases, large numbers have mobilized to call for the freedom of detained migrants. Unions and workers against ICE. ILPS has worked with unions across different sectors and industries, taking forms of action to oppose ICE deployment to their workplaces, collaboration and cooperation with ICE by their employer, and the utilization of ICE to attack workers and community members. We have organized with workers who are not unionized and are often the targets of the most aggressive ICE raids and attacks. When strongly united, workers have immense leverage in their workplaces and the economy as a whole to fight back against ICE through collective action. Students and teachers against ICE. On colleges and school campuses, students have linked up with educators, teachers, and professors through coordinated trainings, coalitions, and networks to prepare and respond to ICE presence and threats of detainment. They have campaigned for their schools to not cooperate with ICE and to not allow them into their campuses. Many within the universities who have skills or experience, such as law students and law professors, have organized their departments to mobilize in defense of migrants under attack. Freedom of detained migrants and justice for deported migrants. Organizations and communities across the country have come together to coordinate fights to free migrants who have been detained. Sustained campaign efforts and strong coordination across different movements through alliances like the Tango Migrante Movement, and the Defend Migrants Alliance have freed several wrongfully detained migrants. They continue to raise demands to the U.S. and to their home governments for accountability, aid, and the end to the attacks on migrants. We continue to fight for justice for migrants who have been deported, like Jose Medina Andrade, Ligaya Jensen, Zenar de la Cruz, Milagro Solis Portillo, and others. Expanding the mass movement in United Front Against Fascism. The DPS campaign and similar campaigns have served to coordinate organizing efforts against all expressions of the fascist offensive, weaving together the local fights of our members in a united fight across the country. With ICE being at the forefront of the fascist attacks, ILPS and our members have placed emphasis on organizing our communities, linking up with other organizations, offering political education, and mobilizing the people to oppose ICE, defend our communities, and grow the mass movement and united front against fascism. We call for ICE out of our workplaces, schools, and communities. End ICE collaboration. End the deportation machine. Dismantle ICE. End fascist state terror. End forced migration. Free our homelands from foreign domination. To effectively fight back against fascist attacks, we need to forge the power of the people through collective action. This can happen on the local level, organizing communities to make tangible wins, like preventing raids or freeing people who are detained. But we must also link together and sustain our struggles to grow our organized political strength on a national level and win bigger victories. To end the attacks on migrants and the roots of forced migration in the first place, we must build a united front across people's movements to fight against our common enemy, imperialism. Join the DPS campaign. Sustain campaigns and organizing efforts to bring people together in common action to effectively defend our communities. If you or your organization want to join with ILPS in waging the fight against ICE and rising fascism in the US, sign on to the DPS campaign with the link listed in the description. Use our campaign toolkit to learn how to build up and wage local campaigns and link them together with the efforts of others. Join an organization. If you are not part of an organization yet, now is the time to join a genuine pro-people organization or start one yourself. Organizations are expressions of a collective strength which we need to fight back against fascism. Join ILPS. If you are a member of an organization, join grassroots pro-people alliances like the International League of People's Struggle, and our website is ilps.us, to bring together the strengths of our different organizations and movements in waging common action around shared issues. Join and connect with other alliances waging fighting campaigns like the Defend Migrants Alliance. Instagram is Defend Migrants Alliance. And now I'll pass it back to Lev to speak on workplace organizing at the South Center Mall.
Thank you so much. Hi, it's me again. Yeah, so I think to also share that in Gabriela Seattle and Migrante South Center, both are national democratic mass organizations with buy-in. And we also happen to be really embedded very deliberately in this mall in South King County in Washington, as it's a very centralized place for the Filipino community. For the last couple decades, actually, I think it's a little under 2 decades, there have been a lot of Filipinos coming to this shopping center. There is currently a Seafood City grocery store. Folks are familiar with Seafood City, a Jollibee, Chowking, Red Ribbon, and I think just in general, the area is a pretty common place commercially where Filipino community members are coming through. And there's a lot of workers, like hundreds of workers, many of whom are first generation migrants from the Philippines. Some are like very recently migrated within the last year, and some come from longstanding communities that have come together to the U.S. So this year in February, there also was a situation where some of the workers that members of Migrante and Gabriela have been building close ties with, especially in regards to the exploitation and workplace issues that have been coming up again and again in a lot of these stores, especially as Seafood City and Jollibee are owned by basically like the upper echelons of the capitalist class, right? The compradors of the Philippines or Filipino Americans. So they told us that there were sightings of ICE in one of the stores that resulted in a detention of a Filipino, but also a Mexican worker. And following that, there was a mass exodus of a lot of workers that we've come to learn were undocumented or may have had different forms of vulnerable status that for the reasons that we're still continuing to understand like why they left. What we do understand is that at the end of the day, the companies that these workers are employed at essentially provided zero protection from ICE. So this was one instance earlier this year. And so we became decisive in creating some form of network to really ensure that the workers not only knew their basic rights, but also knew that they had the right to self-organize in protecting themselves. And then come June, there was another scenario of ICE coming to the store. And by then we were ready to respond rapidly. And so within hours of an ICE official coming in and requesting the paperwork of some more workers at that same store, we were able to have folks on the ground 24/7 in the mall to, or not 24/7, within the hours of the mall being open, to ensure that what typically happens, right, if someone comes to look for paperwork, it means that they are preparing for some form of raid or to investigate who they can detain. And so we were able to more or less be on watch for a week to ensure that nobody was being impacted, and for us to be able to document and really expose the again, like the collusion, right, between these companies and with ICE, and that there are very minimal resources being provided for workers to understand their basic rights, and then to not allow ICE to enter the facilities. I think something that's I think really an important lesson with workplace organizing is that when we are, viewing these incidences as isolated, or that it only happens to, so-and-so migrant, right? We have to really uncover the the reality that it's a problem of all migrants, right? And that it's actually through coming together that we can really stop ICE raids. There's so many examples from other areas, like I believe in SoCal, there was a similar QRT that happened also at a Seafood City that was able to successfully protect Filipino migrants from facing detention. But for this mall in particular, it really looks like seeing the ties between the economic issues that they're facing in the workplace and this issue of mass deportation, because there are so many people, regardless of their status, that are being profiled, and then also for these companies that it's a matter of just understanding this excess labor can be then replaced by anyone else who is also really struggling to find a job. And so they're not actually protected by these companies by having the quote unquote right paperwork, and that their wages being stolen, right? Or their insecure scheduling, or the health problems that they're also facing, which includes like safety issues in a mall where there's a lot of robberies, car break-ins, and violence against women, and these other instances. We can see that the influence in or excuse me, the presence of ICE in itself is an extension of those health and safety violations. So also to say is there's definitely more work to be done, and really helping to reach so many of the people that come to this mall, because it's hundreds and hundreds of people each day. But I think the really solid lesson is that you really have to be on the ground every day, and really understand the developments so that we can respond, right? And then building those relationships. So whether that looks like group chats where you're teaching people how to use Signal, or whatever secure communication works best for folks. Of course, doing know your rights training, but then also really raising people's consciousness by including political education, and then also engaging folks in different levels of raising demands. So whether that's something as basic as having a safe place in the workplace, or if it's in raising the issue to the whole shopping center. These are all really important steps, and really involving migrant workers who are at the forefront of the fight in really exposing and opposing the state terror from ICE.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. I'll pass it over to Bev to close us out for today.
Oh, thanks, Jay. Oop, expanded my screen and I can't see my notes now. Sorry, hold on one second. Okay, there we go. Okay, so hopefully it's clear from this ICE primer that ICE is just another tactic of the ruling class, whether it be under Democrats or Republicans, with Trump currently as its head, to impose fascist rule to keep the imperialists in power because they can no longer rule in the same way with their so-called democracy. And so this is not just about going after migrants, but a means for the state to actually suppress any dissent or opposition. So as for the solution, it's really up to the people to sharpen and raise our analysis to identify the root cause of these problems, including what causes people to be forced to migrate from their homelands in the first place, which is imperialism. And we have to spread this analysis to really help educate others. But it doesn't stop there, because we need to get our communities organized to mobilize, to build a truly mass movement and the united front of all people's struggles, both here in the US and across the globe, and fight back and resist this fascist imperialist system. So you can find a copy of our primer for download on our website. So here's the QR code that goes directly to our website and goes to the educational materials tab, or you can always go to ilps.us and then do the drop down links. And there are two versions of the primer available for you to download. One is just 1, 2, 3, 4 page in order. And the other one is formatted in the version of a booklet so that you could print it out and staple it together and hand out. So please use these materials and distribute them at your activities to help with sharpening the analysis. And we'll also have a recording of this webinar available on our YouTube channel soon afterwards. On our website, just so that you know, you can also find out more about ILPS's Defend Our Communities, Defend People's Struggle, and People Over Profit campaigns. We also have a campaign toolkit there to help you wage your own mass campaigns and build a united front. And all of that is for free. So I want you to put your hand on your heart and dig deep in your pocket to see if you can make a donation so we can continue putting out all this great information. So, tonight we have almost about 50 people on here. If we all put in $5 to $20, maybe we can reach $500 tonight. So we'll put we put in the Venmo handle in the chat. So if you can make a donation tonight, we would really appreciate that. So we are going to just double check if there are any questions that folks have about the primer, and then we'll be wrapping up. So yeah, just want to check if there was anything in the chat or if anyone has anything I'm going to pause the recording real quick just so that. So it's just a reminder that ILPS and Defend Migrants Alliance have teamed up for a week of action. And so if you can go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. I don't know if my slides aren't loading correctly, but okay, if our slide deck person could help us go to the next slide, I'm just going to continue on. But please do go to our socials to check out what's happening in your local area. So again, you can find ILPS on Instagram at ilps.us and the Defend Migrants Alliance at Defend Migrants Alliance, also on IG. But we do have our calls here listed here. Defend People's Struggle, defend our communities and our workplaces, ICE out of workplaces, hospitals and communities, and local collaboration with ICE, CBP, National Guard, U.S. troops out of our communities and our homelands, and also hands off Venezuela. So we didn't talk much about what's happening there, but definitely a case where we can see it so clearly in terms of how the U.S. is really terrorizing the Venezuelan people for the sake of grabbing their natural resources, which is oil, right? And so how they continue their lies to gain way to destabilize the nation there. But the people of Venezuela are also fighting back, and we support them as well. But if you can go to the next slide. Just wanted to announce for those of you who can join us tomorrow, DMA, Defend Migrants Alliance, and is collaborating with the International Migrants Alliance and the International Women's Alliance to put on a press conference called Hands Off Migrant Women and Children. So you get to hear from migrant women and their families who are organizing to defend themselves from attacks by ICE and CPS. So they'll be talking too about one of the particular cases where children have to defend themselves in court without their family members present because they're ripped apart from their families. And so you'll get to hear the story of Victoria as well. So please join the DMA in their press conference tomorrow, or send it to others so that they can join as well. But if you can, I'm sorry, go back to the last slide, the previous slide. But yeah, just for folks to continue looking at the week of actions that are coming up. Just want to close out from here because really from LA, Los Angeles, DC, Chicago, San Francisco, and Portland, the people have really fought back against the National Guard deployments. And our sisters and brothers and families have also fought back massive ICE operations in Charlotte, New Orleans, Minneapolis, and many more cities. So let's keep building the mass movement of migrants and linking and raising the people's issues so it's clear that we have one common enemy, which is imperialism, And it's our duty to our future generations to unite all people to bring it down. So we'll see you all on the streets, hopefully coming up as we close out this week of action and going into the new year of 2026. Let's really make this a people's mass movement to bring down imperialism. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar tonight, and we'll hopefully see you in our future upcoming webinars. Thank you so much. Have a good night.